And I am thrilled to have with us tonight Archbishop Linda Nicholls, Primate of the Anglican Church here in Canada. Linda, it is great to have you with us. I almost feel like we're able to sit in the living room together and have a coffee. We're this close.
Yes, Zoom gives that impression, even if we're thousands of miles apart.
It is so true. It's one of the opportunities or gifts that the pandemic has been giving us is an opportunity to connect with people despite long, far distances. And a few weeks ago, I was able to have a similar conversation with Mike Frost, where it was morning for him in Australia, but evening for us here in New Brunswick. I know a number of people from all over are here with us. I just want to invite you in the chat to type in your name and maybe where you're from, just to kind of give us an idea of where everyone is. Just make sure you use panelists and all attendees. That would be great. And so welcome. Linda, just kind of as a way of beginning, for me, knowing people's story and kind of who they are is really important and valuable in terms of relational building. Wonder if you'd share a little bit about who Linda is besides being primate.
Okay, thank you, Shawn. A few words that would describe me are that I am a musician. That's been a really important part of my life, all of my life. I learned to play the piano as a young person and studied piano right through university and studied flute. And in the middle of my ministry, realized I didn't have enough music in my life to keep me grounded and sane, and have joined choirs ever since. Singing has really grounded me and given me a place to be able to use my musical gifts, but also be part of a community that's creating something that's beautiful. So music has always been a part of my life. Another word that would describe me is I'm a canoeist. That's been something that I've always enjoyed the outdoors. As a child, my family would camp for holidays. It was what you could afford with 4 kids, you know. And so we would go on camping trips, and I was a Girl Guide and loved the outdoors. And at one point in my life, had the opportunity to begin to go canoeing with a group of women. And discovered I loved it very, very much, and have canoed almost every summer for the last 30 years, including some parts of the Northwest Territories, some of the big rivers up there, and did a little bit of whitewater canoeing for a few years until I came close to not surviving the trip and decided that I needed to go back to just the lakes. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Another piece of my life, what would that be? Oh, well, I'm staffed to a cat. I like dogs. People often ask me, don't you like dogs? And I say, yes, I love dogs, but I never felt like I had enough time at home to be able to actually care for a dog well. But cats are a little bit more independent. And so I've had cats for a number of years, and they keep me grounded. And the current cat thinks that the current situation is just perfect. 24/7 staff. Other than that, I'm an aunt. I'm a great aunt. I'm a sister. Those are other parts of my life as well, and they're all important to me. And I try to make time for friends and family in and around what's happening in the church, and have always been very grateful for really good friends who hold me to that.
Wow, thanks. You mentioned being 24/7 staff now at home. Clearly in recent history, there's none of your successors that have ever experienced this role in a way that you have. So, there's probably no notes or journals that you can go back and say, how did they navigate this? what are you noticing, in these early stages of your leadership?
Well, it feels like already I've had kind of three phases. The first phase was the first couple of months of just kind of being the Bishop of Huron and the primate and trying to finish one job and engage the other. And then there was about 5.5 months of the primacy in the way that Fred had experienced it, of traveling and a lot of visiting dioceses and international meetings, and felt like I was in airport lounges all the time. And then suddenly in March, coming to a complete grinding halt. And for the first couple of weeks, kind of wandering around going, okay, what does the primate do now that she can't go anywhere? And we were still learning how to navigate this kind of technology. So those first few weeks were hard to figure it out. I think diocesan bishops had very clear priorities right away, because they had to deal with what does this mean for worship and for clergy and for parishioners. But for the national office, it was a bit of a different time, trying to figure out what and how we would carry on other pieces of ministry. And that gradually morphed into opportunities like this to engage with smaller groups of people right across the country, and particularly lay people. I invited the bishops. I said, I'm happy to come to confirmation classes or clergy gatherings or whatever would be possible. And I had some opportunity to have wonderful Q&As with young people, with youth groups, with confirmation classes, clergy deanery things. I've done a retreat online, and then began to get invitations to preach, either in person on Zoom or Facebook Live, but more often lately by pre-recording something, pre-recording a sermon or a message, and then being able to join the parish on the Sunday morning and participate in the service. It's meant working from home 90% of the time, occasionally being in Toronto. The office there is still officially closed, but staff are permitted to come in as needed. And I've been in a few times just to check on things and pick up mail and that kind of thing. International meetings have gone online. The only problem with those is that they end up being at unearthly hours because of all the time zones. So thankfully, mine, the earliest was 6 a.m., but others on that same call were in the middle of the night. So I realized I had it better than some. But international groups like the primates meetings and the Anglican Roman Catholic Dialogue have all been on Zoom. So we're learning how to use Zoom better. We're learning how to use it for the Council of General Synod. And there are things that are really good about it. It's efficiency, but we lose a little bit about it. We lose the relationship building that can be essential to work in the church. You need to know someone beyond what they might say in a discussion on a particular topic. You need to have had lunch with them, gone for a walk with them. And we're missing some of that in the council and in the house bishops. So lots of learning going on. I think there's some things we'll carry on after we're able to meet in person. But I think we're all just longing for the day when we can actually shake someone's hand again.
Yeah, I remember my first Sunday being when here in my part of the New Brunswick, where we were able to go back that first Sunday into into corporate worship, and kind of walking out and having that awkward dance of, nope, I can't hug you. No, I can't shake your hand. Okay, I'll just awkwardly wave at you from a couple of feet with masks on.
And the no singing thing, I'm sorry, that is killing me. The no singing for church service. No, you can sing along if you mute yourself and all the rest of it, but to not be able to share in corporate singing is a real loss. So I'm longing for that.
Yeah, I think no matter who I've talked to across the country, that's the common thread. I hear a lot of excitement of people who have taken risks and tried creative ways of worship and engaging with people, but kind of the common thread is What's with the no singing? And what if we tried it this way? Is there a loophole in through that?
Yeah.
I mean, certainly, I mean, you're providing leadership and support to a church that is, you know, not just in one region, like literally coast to coast to coast. And I mean, it's no surprise to anyone, we're diverse, you know, and are there common threads that you're seeing kind of emerge from what's happening during this in your conversations?
Well, I think one of the first things that people discovered was that we're more resilient and creative than we give ourselves credit for. That clergy and parishes have been able to respond and have found ways to connect. And I've seen some marvelous work online. Creativity, video skills, ways of gathering the most elderly parishioners to the children and engage them online. And so I think that's been a common theme across the church. I think the diversity is seen in one of the things that it's awoken in us nationally is the need to advocate for better digital access. Whether it's a rural area in southern Canada or whether it's the tremendous geography of the north, the cost of being able to connect when it's so essential for education, for healthcare, and for spiritual care is something we need to take seriously and need to be advocating for with our government, with our leaders across, and figuring out as a church. We did in one instance have to send somebody an iPad because they had no other way to connect to the Zoom meeting that they needed to be on. And we thought, well, we're not paying for them to travel. We can certainly, make the other infrastructure accessible. And so we're seeing that. I think right at the moment, what I'm hearing, and it concerns me, is the extreme exhaustion and weariness of church leaders, whether it's the bishops or whether it's clergy. People are just really tired and stressed. They've been dealing with having to make massive shifts in how they do ministry, which have significant consequences if you do it wrong. I mean, if you don't get it right when you were allowed back in-person worship, it could be serious. And at the same time, they're dealing with all those stresses that everybody else is dealing with around family, around, if a spouse is working, where do they work and what does their connection mean? And being put in isolation and kids and online school and all of this. So I am concerned that we really take care of each other and particularly the leaders, but I know it's true for laity too, that we don't always recognize when we've been under significant stress for a long time, it becomes normal and we don't realize the effects of that stress. So I do hope that we will pay attention. I was watching a seminar today on stress and mental health, and somebody said, and you need to pay particular attention to the strong people because everybody assumes they're okay because they look okay. But somebody needs to ask them, are they really okay? And reach out and check in with them. So these are a few of the things I'm hearing and seeing. Lots of people invested in the online material and worship and ways of doing things that will carry on afterwards. But some real longing to be able to gather again. Those potluck suppers are looking pretty good now.
Okay, be honest. Between you and I, did you ever think you would say that?
I actually like potluck suppers, I love seeing all the variety of things that people bring in. And that green Jello salad that I haven't had forever. And then I wouldn't make for myself, but I can have it at a potluck supper.
I thought that was just a maritime thing.
Oh, no.
Well, I'm glad to see it's made the way. You made the comment about kind of mental and emotional health, and one of the things that I've heard in talking with people not just in the church, but also in the mental health field, is huge numbers of domestic abuse,
Yes.
huge issues around suicide intervention and prevention, addiction issues kind of running through. Here in New Brunswick, there was a comment to say, sales for NB liquor and cannabis NB, like through the roof. And what does that say to you as a leader in the church, of that those things kind of become our default in kind of navigating difficult times?
Well, I think it says to me that we live lifestyles that are so focused on outward things, whether it's work and getting the kids to this and doing this and doing this and doing this, and we don't actually know how or give enough attention to the depth and quality of our relationships. And when stress hits all of those externals, there aren't the internal resources to go back to help ground those relationships. I've certainly heard the call around domestic abuse, the rise in lawyers saying they've got this huge increase in people seeking separation and divorce because they haven't actually had to be together for a long time. And now they're in the same space. And if the space isn't adequate or it's got other tensions, then there's problems. And I think the church has something to say about relationships. When I used to do pre-marriage prep, I would say to the couples, it's guaranteed you're going to have conflict. That's just a guarantee because you're different people. But the hope is that with a Christian understanding of both marriage and of your place as children of God, both individually and together, there's a place for you to come back to bring that conflict and to know how to practice healthy conversation and relationships that are about mutual love for each other. It's not power over of either kind. It's a mutuality in which forgiveness is possible because you're forgiven by God. And to build a relationship that can find some strength there and practice what that looks like is something I don't know that we talk enough about. What it looks like to practice the kind of relationship we have with God with one another.
Wow. Can we plan another session just on that?
Sure.
Because I mean, I think you've hit on something that is so key in what we're living and experiencing. Is, some find it really easy to have that intimate relationship with God, but then extending that same grace, love, respect to those around, often there's that separation.
Yeah, and I'd have to say my experience both of church, well, particularly of church, is that we're really good at the coffee hour conversation. We're not good at the really deep conversation about what matters to you.
Yeah.
What roots and grounds your values? How are you shaped around this so that I understand why you and I might disagree or why we might agree on it? And I have to listen and learn from you why this is important so that we don't just presume that I'm right because it's me and you're wrong because you're not me or you're not in the same place as me. And I think that kind of in-depth conversation requires trust, and it requires a depth of relationship that's been built on listening. And we have very few places in our life as a church where we do that. I mean, worship is a particular time, but it's not about building relationships with each other. It's our relationship with God. And coffee hour is often fairly superficial. what did you do this week, and what are the kids doing, and how are you, and I got to run, I got to take somebody somewhere. But it's not the kind of conversation that can go beyond that and deal with the emotions and the feelings that are attached to who we are and how we were raised and how we were formed and shaped and how we relate to the scriptures and how we understand our faith. And I just long for opportunities for people to be able to do that, because I think that's where the grounding allows us to embrace the other, even if we disagree or differ, and still be one in Christ at the Eucharistic table.
And that I think is so key. And I mean, I have great relationships with some people, and we disagree kind of vehemently on some things, but there's a mutual respect, a love. Okay, I don't see it from your vantage point, but I respect that that's your perspective or decision on it. Have you noticed any ways? I mean, certainly when we can only get together in, small bubbles, depending where you are in the country or over the screen, are you hearing or coming across ways that people are being able to take those steps to build that trust and relationship?
Can't say that I've heard anything directly, but I am aware that actually one of the advantages of this way of gathering is it allows people to be in a safe space for themselves. And frankly, people are in control. They can turn off their video, they can turn off their microphone, they can shut down, they can leave if they don't feel safe. Whereas when you're in a physical meeting, sometimes people feel constrained by social um, boundaries that keep people there when they may not feel able to. Um, I think it does require smaller groups. I think that's one of the reasons that small groups have been a place where that has been most successful in the church, is when there's a small group that meets regularly, that gets to know one another, that can build that relationship in addition to whatever that small group might be doing, whether it's Bible study or whether it's Anglican church women or whatever it is, but it's possible to do that. I did hear about a youth group that had started just as a group to gather and talk about the big questions. Just what are your big questions about life? And it started as a fairly small group and has grown into a group that's large enough that somebody said to the youth leader, you're planting a church. And the young person said, I had never thought of it like that. They just thought they were gathering young adults who didn't have a place to ask these questions and talk about them.
That's wonderful.
I think that's the kind of thing I'd love to see happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And there is such a gift when we can get to that place where, we can have those people that we trust, that we're journeying with, who particularly going through seasons like this, where, someone knows you well enough to know, I won't point out who they are because they are on the webinar tonight, but, a close friend of mine who knows me well, who knows that if I respond to a text in a certain way, and this happened a few weeks ago. They were texting and I was just kind of, responding. I wasn't in a great headspace of, COVID fatigue and isolation fatigue. And, and they pushed back. I was just trying to kind of blow them off, and they pushed back and said, you are not okay. I know you well enough to know. And, so they phoned and we talked, and it was like the trust is there. And I could say, I'm fine. I'm not doing anything I shouldn't. But no, my head's like, I'm done with it. Kind of thing.
Well, it's my favorite tagline is the one from Cheers. You want a place where everybody knows your name, where
Exactly.
you matter to the community, regardless of what you say or do, that you still belong and that people care about you and that they want to engage with you. And everybody longs to be loved.
Yeah. Yeah. When you think about what this is doing to kind of the church universal, because certainly, I don't know about about you, Linda, but often I hear, I can't wait till we can go back. I can't wait till we can go back. And almost since day one, I've had in my head, something's going to change. Like, we can't go back. And I would love for us to not long to go back. I understand why we want to go back. But are you hearing the same thing of, that longing?
Well, I hear both. I hear people longing to go back to gathering. I don't actually hear them longing. They long to go back to hearing the choir or to seeing the people they know. And there's a certain longing for the building, but I do think there's been some breaking of what I call our addiction to buildings, where people have said, I think it was I sometimes forget where I've heard things, but I was hearing somebody talk about two congregations that have been in very tentative conversations about coming together. And because of COVID, they're online and they decided to worship together. And now that they're looking at the potential to being able to go back, we're not going back to two separate buildings. They're very clear about that. And I think that that's one of the gifts that this time has given us. It's broken the pattern and the habit of assuming that we have to have a building or have that building.
Right.
There will be many who will go back, absolutely. There will be some who, frankly, because I think we have not yet felt or seen the financial impact of COVID because of the government supports. And when those begin to dry up, and as we have to go back to the full realities, the things we learned about being able to do things for less cost, but still be able to worship and to engage, may well have a stronger life for us. I think we've learned that people who've been shut out by our assumption that everybody has to come to the building, which often is not accessible for a whole variety of reasons, can be part of the community in this way. And will we continue that? Will we take their needs and their concerns into account? I think there's some things we will need to learn, though. We're going to have to learn how to do discipleship differently, because we've had lots of people who put their toe back into the church pot.
Yep.
Just because they could do it from their living room in their PJs with their coffee. But we don't always know who they are, and we haven't yet built a relationship with them. And what will it take to do discipleship that's invitational and doesn't require too much too soon, and allows people to build relationship online and mentors in a new way? I think we've seen some disturbing things about the ways in which, not within our church as much, but across if you want, the universal church, some disturbing ways in which Christians express their commitment to the common good. I mean,
yeah,
I have some real concern about some of the expressions that see individualism and individual freedoms as more important than our commitment to our brothers and sisters. And I think some of those divides are going to be there for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And it's interesting. There's a number of comments coming in saying, Larry from Diocese of Moosonee commented that, even elderly parishioners are noting that Zoom has been a gift to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And
well, they can hear.
that alone.
And they can engage from home without risking, particularly in the north, or places where weather can be very bad, especially in the winter. There's lots of seniors who don't venture out the door if there's ice and snow, and suddenly they can still be part of what's happening.
Right.
And I think we need to take that seriously.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned that comfort and that ease of people being able to kind of join, a local church, or maybe it's not even anywhere remotely local. But there's that ability to connect. And one of the things, in the recent years when I've traveled around doing training on evangelism or mission, I often talk about the field of dreams model for evangelism.
Feel
That,
that come.
yeah, exactly. And I say the Anglican Church is guilty of it. We've put buildings up every 10 kilometers and put a beautiful sign up that says all are welcome.
Yeah.
And we say we've done it. And I think for during an era that worked. Whereas now that doesn't work. But yet we are noticing some who, as you point out, they can do it in the safety of their home, in their pajamas with their coffee. I mean, I'll be fully honest, I'd love to do every Sunday morning like that.
Well, it has opened a door for people, and if there are other bishops on the call, they will know that we had the Dean of Canterbury's Cathedral at the House of Bishops in October talking about his experience of doing daily office in the gardens of Canterbury Cathedral because they couldn't even be in the building, and discovering that what they thought was going to reach out just to the local people who would normally have joined them for morning and evening prayer was touching the lives of thousands of people worldwide who were tuning in to listen every day. Mm-hmm. And we're sending them emails to say, he said we couldn't even respond to all of the emails, but he said he was receiving emails that said, "You've put me back in touch with the church and with my faith." Wow. And he pondered on it and thought part of it was that it connected with ordinariness of life. Being in the garden, sitting on a chair, or just standing in the rain, or, and the best parts were when the cat came to photobomb it, that people realized that you could talk about and with God and pray to God in the midst of a cat jumping on your lap or off your lap or dipping his paw in the milk jug, and it was real. Mm-hmm. And he felt that was a message the church does not adequately give, particularly, he felt, because as the Dean of Canterbury Cathedral, Canterbury Cathedral is pretty imposing if you've been in it, humongous. Yeah. And, you're not going to feel like this has much connection to your ordinary daily life there in the same way as a chair in the garden or standing in the piggery. Yeah. And so he said they are committed to continuing at least one of their daily offices outdoors and online, even though they can now be back in the cathedral. Right. And I think that's the kind of discernment we're going to have to do is, and the thing, the cross-boundary thing, we Anglicans think geographically. Mm-hmm. We think in the parish model of parish boundaries. I think, folks, we're going to have to do some wrestling with that because people are connecting because they just happened on your website. And they could be in Japan, they could be in, Iqaluit, they could be in Houston, Texas. And of course, that really changes our whole model of thinking about how do we engage people. And of course, we've based our governance and our financial model on the parish geographic base. And so what's it going to mean to shift that? And these are really huge questions that are going to be part of our conversations for, I think, some years to come. But I hope we never lose the opportunity to invite and welcome somebody who just happens to be watching from X, Y, or Z, because maybe they have a gift to share with us that we haven't heard. If we can make that connection.
I mean, you were just talking about, the changes going forward. And I mean, certainly one of the things that has been part of what's been going on with your leadership as a whole revisiting of the national church and various roles and functions of, several groups. And encompassed with that, not long ago, we were given what some would call the death notice of 2040. I looked at that and said, well, there's an opportunity to prove math and science wrong. when you kind of look ahead and think, as we're navigating through this pandemic, what's giving you hope?
Well, first I want to say about the 2040 thing. The 2040 thing is a snapshot.
Right.
A moment in time, and it's a statistical thing. If nothing changes, this is what we could expect.
Right.
Which is, of course, the wake-up call to say, well, let's change it. That's the answer to that. And of course, it was produced before COVID. So lots of things have changed.
Don't ask Neil for a follow-up.
Sorry?
Don't ask Neil for a follow-up.
What gives me hope is, frankly, the creativity and the resilience of Anglicans. I mean, this isn't the first time the Anglican Church has been through a pandemic. I mean, it lived through it in 1918, and we lived through SARS. Sorry. And we've lived through other times when people predicted the end of the world. And I think the Anglican Church has the gifts it needs. It has a grounded historic root with a base in Scripture and historic faith, and in bringing that together with the current experience and situation, and it's adaptable. And if you've done any traveling around the world and seen Anglicanism in its expressions around the world, you know that it doesn't look the same everywhere. It has elements that are reflective of our history and our traditions and our practice of prayer and Scripture and Eucharist, and but it's adapted to the local situation.
Yeah.
And I think we're being asked to adapt to the local situation even more profoundly now. The challenge will be what holds us together. And I love Desmond Tutu's answer to that. We meet.
Yeah.
We are committed to being together. We're committed to being at the table of Jesus Christ together. And we're committed to doing that through living Scripture, even as we disagree sometimes and argue over it. We do that through the baptismal covenant. I love the baptismal covenant and the 5 marks of mission as the expression of who we are. And we do that through an expression of ordered ministry with a historic base.
Mm.
And I look forward to some of the creativity that will emerge out of this, of maybe a church that is totally online and finds a way. Now, we have to wrestle with the Eucharistic question then, and I realize that's a big question, but a starting place for a worshiping community. We've rediscovered morning prayer, folks. We didn't know we were missing it, but we needed it. Yeah. And when we needed it, we had it to draw on and to pull us together again. And I've actually really enjoyed the times that I've worshiped with people online with either BAS or BCP morning prayer, and recognizing the richness that's there that allows us to delve into the Word, that allows us to pray together, and is worship. So I see hopefulness in Anglicans. I see hopefulness in the creativity that's possible. Do I think that it's going to, do I think it's going to be bigger or smaller? I don't know. I honestly don't. I mean, I think that's up to people on the ground locally. Mm-hmm. I think it will depend a bit on, are we also going to pay attention to the social justice issues that have been revealed by this time?
Yeah.
The huge gaps in our social fabric that, frankly, the church has known about. We've known that long-term care facilities were not adequately run. Mm-hmm. We've known that. Clergy have been in them. They see them all the time. And yes, we've tried to raise our voice, but I think we need to be louder and stronger on that.
Picking up on that, Archbishop, what are some ways that you think, I think one of the missed opportunities that we've had kind of historically is kind of missing that prophetic voice angle, or not angle, but calling. Um, what are some ways in which you think we as a church could become more prophetic in our communities?
Well, I think there's no question that this period of time has shown us that some of us have far more adequate access to the digital universe than others. We've required children to suddenly move their education online, but some of them don't have adequate access either to the equipment like a computer or a laptop, and some don't have adequate access to internet that doesn't cost the earth and that their families can't afford,
Mm.
as well as the fact that we've got a huge digital divide with parts of the country that don't have any internet access. And you don't have to go far to find it. That's true in our rural areas in southern Canada, as much as it is a huge issue in the north and other places. And I think we need to be voices, strong voices, saying this is no longer optional. Healthcare, education, spiritual care, all being offered in this way, are essential services for life.
Mm.
And I think we need to speak up on that. I think we've seen the huge gaps in that people who are essential to our well being are amongst the lowest paid and the lowest valued. So, the caregivers in long term care homes, for one. Um, think of the grocery store people who have to stock the shelves, have to be working, and are in the midst of large crowds of people at times, and
Absolutely.
whose lives are at risk because we need food. And frankly, we don't even have to go to the grocery store. But many of them have to deliver it to us, and that where our privilege meets this gap, I think we need to pay attention and say this isn't right. I think with teachers, I feel for families with teachers, because teachers, I think I'm not saying that they're not adequately compensated, but I think we need to value their work better. I also think of families, maybe it's because I have a developmentally challenged adult in my family system. And I cannot imagine what families with special needs children are going through during COVID.
Hmm.
Have we adequately checked in on those families? Because I think the risks for those families are huge, not only of the lack of development of the child because of the lack of services, but also the stress levels. Those stress levels are levels that most people can't even imagine. I mean, if you're stressed with a family of normal or average children who are doing quite well in school, and you think you're stressed with that, imagine the stress with a child who is maybe nonverbal, needs constant supervision, needs constant encouragement to develop speech or language or whatever. Uh, I, I just, my heart goes out to families that are struggling. So I think those are some of the voices we can raise up and say, how do we become part of uh, partnering with others who are speaking up on these issues, but also making sure that we don't forget those issues when things look like they're going back to, quote, normal.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I can echo, some of what you're saying um, there's a number of families I know with children of various learning abilities, and I mean, I can't even imagine. I mean, I've not been diagnosed with anything, but I couldn't imagine myself going through school and all of a sudden having to be home, stuck in front of a screen, Zooming all day, and and I've got a 9-year-old niece and a 7-year-old nephew, and you know, seeing photos of them in the spring when schools here in New Brunswick were shut down, and I thought, you guys should be outside. Like, you shouldn't be on the computer all day. Like, this is counterintuitive of what we've been saying for years of, how kids need to develop. And
And I think a local community needs to look at what its local issues are. They won't be the same issues everywhere, and there'll be differences. But I think one of the things that the government often forgets is that the best local network that's connected with every generation on the ground are the churches.
True.
And so we have the knowledge of what's happening on the ground through the lives of the families and the seniors and those in between.
Mm-hmm.
And we're often not either consulted, or we don't speak up to say, hey, we've got information and we've got a voice here that can help raise up these concerns.
Yeah.
And I hope we will do that as we go forward. Yeah.
Which I think is different from the mindset of we have a right to a voice.
Yeah.
Recognizing, because I've heard of some, who can remember back in the day when, government officials would call on the church for opinions and, open in prayer this, and then all of a sudden, that stopped, which made sense. But it's not that we have a right to a voice, but, we have another voice in the mix that is as equal value.
Yeah. And we need to partner with those where we share values, where we share a common commitment. We can't always partner with everybody, but there are lots of times we can, and we can join our voices together, either in a ministerial or multi-Christian group, or even interfaith groups. There's lots we share it for the common good with others, and with other organizations that are dealing with poverty or homelessness or any of these other issues. Those are the people and places we need to say, hey, we as the church can see what's happening on the ground. We believe there's a concern here for the common good that we are called as Christians to be engaged with, to care for our neighbor, to respect the dignity of every human being, to seek justice and peace for all. And to do that, we have to do that with other people.
Yeah, and I think with that, one of the opportunities we have where kind of the normal rhythm, I hate using that word normal, the old rhythm of being in ministry and in church leadership is slowed down. In some ways, I think this gives those in leadership in the local church the opportunity to kind of say, what are the needs out here? What's going on? I mean, here in our diocese, we have one parish that literally is across the street from elementary school. And right before the pandemic hit, they were about to partner to use their building to provide daily meals for the kids. Now that all got shut down, and so it was like, it would have been easy to just say, oh well, we tried, but instead they went to the school and said, what's it cost for you to do it? And so they, the rector went back to the parish and said, okay, we need to raise, I think it was a little over $1,500 maybe, to feed the kids who had that need. And within a week or two, the money was there, and they were able to go as the church. Thank you, David Peer. It was $1,500. I knew someone on here would on that. But went to the school and said, here, on behalf of the church, not only are we committed to praying for you regularly, but we want to walk this out with you.
Well, and I've seen several parishes that were doing community suppers who pivoted and transitioned to packaging the suppers and delivering them. And there's a couple of parishes that I know of that are delivering hundreds of meals every week to ensure that people who didn't have access have food. And I think part of it is opening our eyes to what's in our community, not what we think is in our community, but what's actually here. And that means paying attention to the signals and the signs of what's going on. And then asking, what is God calling us to do?
This has been really great, Linda. I want to just kind of let people know that if they have questions, to hit the Q&A button at the top, at the bottom of their screen. There's a few questions in there already. Depending how many come in, we'll try to tackle them. And the Archbishop has said she's open for anything. Um,
Probably no question you're going to ask that I haven't heard, or at least that's
um,
a great name.
um, I know some people need a moment or two to kind of formulate some questions or thoughts. When you kind of going back to where we started, but with you, Linda, the person, what are some gifts or techniques that you've been using I mean, you mentioned being full-time staff, but I mean, certainly there are a number of us who have been living, alone in almost full isolation. What's been some good healthy coping mechanisms that you've had?
I live in London, Ontario, which is a city that I'm truly grateful for because they have preserved and built in every new subdivision trails and paths behind and between houses where there's natural space that's left natural. And then they put a gravel or a boardwalk path through it. And so I have a path very close to my home that I can walk every day. That over the course from March till now has gone from snow and ice to spring to summer back to snow and ice. But for me, it's really critical to get outside into God's creation to feel the natural rhythm of life is going on. And so I sometimes have to push myself to get out the door, but I almost every day I'm out walking. As I said early on, music is my life, and so it's given me an opportunity to go back to playing piano and just renewing some of my love for pieces that I'd not played for some time. I think connecting with friends on Zoom. I have a group of friends that some years ago we used to, on a Friday night, go to a pub for dinner and then go to somebody's home for dessert and just enjoy each other's company. So now we have a Zoom pub night where we each bring our own glass, but just have a conversation and catch up with one another and see each other. And so those are a few of the ways, in addition to just being aware of the self-care needs, keeping up with spiritual direction, keeping up with family and friends.
Yeah, thanks for that. Those are some great tips. Peter asks, what is the best thing that you have learned about doing ministry during the pandemic?
I can videotape things. My goodness, I have a studio in my living room. I have the Anglican videos provided me with tripods and lights and special microphone, and I never knew that I was going to have to be a video producer when I came into ministry, but I've learned how to do that and how to make that work. So that's probably the best thing because it allows me then to connect with parishes in a variety of ways.
I think that might be a common thread. I won't single anyone out who's on here, but I know you're not the only one that has said, and even today I had a phone call from someone and we were talking and he said, I wasn't trained for any of this in seminary.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Margaret asks, can you say something about coping with grief that's not just about the death of a loved one from COVID or anything else?
Oh yeah, one of the hardest parts of this for me has been this fall being profoundly aware in the bottom of my soul a grief for the world, a grief for everything that's happening, a grief for those who've lost somebody, a grief for those who are working so darn hard in healthcare, a grief for refugees who are caught in refugee camps and are vulnerable, a grief for a broken world that I can't fix. I can't fix it. And I've really found that grief hard because we go along day by day thinking we're trying to do good stuff and we're hoping we're making a difference, and but at a time like this I realize that I am incredibly privileged. I live in a country that has good health care. a country that has provided resources so that many people still are employed, not all, but many, that has healthcare so that you don't have to worry about going to the hospital and ending up in COVID in an ICU and costing you millions of dollars. I live in a country that's safe relatively, as we saw the racism issues in the United States. And I'm not saying there isn't racism here, but we don't see the depth of the violence that we see elsewhere. But when I felt all of that, I've just felt this profound grief for God's world that is broken. And we're part of that brokenness. We're part of the systems that have allowed this to happen. The long-term care facilities, the underpaid workers, and the racism that exists in our world. Just look at our relationship with Indigenous peoples. And so sometimes it's overwhelming. And I've had to come to realize that sometimes I just need to set the grief aside and focus on something that gives me joy and something that reminds me that this is still God's world. And I can't fix it all. And that's not an easy answer because it doesn't change anything. But it gives me a space to breathe, and it allows me, to go for a walk and be in touch with the fact that the sun will come up tomorrow. This too shall pass. And God has seen this brokenness for thousands of years. And we're just one part of it. And to look for beauty wherever we can find it. The cat helps. The cat will jump in my lap whether I'm fixing the world or whether I'm just filling his dish. So finding those small moments of grace in the middle of it, I think, give us, and reaching out to friends and giving back to somebody so that you've got a sense of some ownership of giving love back to this broken world and not just receiving all the grief.
Tying in with this, Clyde asks, how do you express grief for in solidarity with someone who has experienced profound loss during the pandemic?
I think sometimes the only thing you can do is to be in touch with them, and to say, I don't know what to say other than that my heart is with you. And it may just be sitting in silence on Zoom. It may be just reminding them that they're not alone, and that I can't understand their grief. I can't fully understand it, but I stand with them. And sometimes people who are in such deep grief simply need to know that someone else will carry them, someone else will hold them, someone else will be faith for them when they cannot have faith because they are so broken. And maybe you can be that person that can say, I know you can't believe at this moment, or I know you can't find the light, but I promise you the light is there, and I will simply hold a candle for you until you can see it again. And that's a hard place to be because you can't fix it, you can't change it, you can't just wave a magic wand and make it go away. It means you have to stay there in the pain with them. And that's the only thing.
And to add to that, I think, and I don't know about you in your lived history, Linda, but I know for me, some of the best times when I've been in my, darkest or my most brokenness, the people who have said, I don't have words, but I'll just be present, has been the best. Because it was the ones who thought they had words that just made me more angry.
Job's friends.
Yeah.
We don't want advice. We just want somebody to sit in the pain with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, it's difficult no matter what. Miriam asks, and I mean, I'm curious to your response on this. What do you see the future of liturgical life when we've gone to virtual worship creates the atmosphere of an audience versus participants?
I think that depends on how you structure the worship. I've seen parishes that have done a really good job of engaging the whole community. I'm trying to remember. It was an anniversary service, and they had during the summer arranged it so that the words of, was it a hymn or the creed? I'm trying to remember what it was, but each family in the parish was given one word or one piece to illustrate in some way on a piece of paper, and then to take a picture of themselves holding it up. And all of those were woven together then into one continuous stream. And you had a sense of the whole community participating, children and grandparents. And so I think we have to be more creative online than we think. So I don't think the difficulty is that you have to find ways to encourage participation. You know, like turn off your mic and sing along. And the leaders have to sing, because otherwise other people won't. They have to see you singing. And I think in the prayers, there are ways to engage people, invite, a group of people. I mean, even our Sunday worship is is often kind of audience like. So I don't think it's as different as we sometimes think, but it's harder work because you have to do all the preparatory stuff to make it happen and make sure people can be online. What do I think about liturgy overall? I think we're going to see greater diversity in the sense that if we're not able to be together in person for Eucharist, then we're going to have, morning prayer online. I know there's some people looking at and asking, does this mean we can't do anything online around the Eucharist? That's a huge question, and there's going to be people, writing me letters tomorrow about even suggesting that we could do it differently. But I know of some people who are thinking deeply and theologically about not wanting to call this virtual, because this is still real in some way.
Yeah.
And so how do we express that reality? And is the Eucharist translatable? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think we as a church are going to need to have that conversation.
Which, and particularly ingrained in our polity is the Eucharist, and that, it's a central function of our worship. And, for me, whether it's, a modern Eucharist, a contemporary or traditional Eucharist, done well, it can be a very intimate moment, right? And now to remove that and to, I think I can count on one hand the amount of times I've received the Eucharist this year, where in previous years I lost count. And so to lift that kind of what some would say is a central element to who we are as a people, to kind of lift that out and now say, I would think it almost puts us in a bit of an identity crisis to some degree.
Well, and I think we have to have the conversation about what is normative and what is an exception under exceptional circumstances, and how do we define those, and think about worship, and think about what is it about being present together that is essential to it. I do not want us to lose in-person Eucharistic worship. I'm not advocating that at all. But I recognize the dilemma for some about not being able to access that for months at a time. And what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I know there have been conversations about spiritual worship, spiritual communion. Mm-hmm. I just think we need to have some honest conversation together with people who are missing the Eucharist deeply, and others who are saying, I grew up on morning prayer. I'm quite liking this. Thank you very much. And yes, I miss the Eucharist, but I can wait till next summer. It's okay.
Mhm.
But I think there's going to be, I hope we can do it with grace and compassion for the differences we will find.
Yeah. Well, and as I'm sure most people watching are aware, if not, I'll do a plug for the National Church. But there's been a number of great essays that have been written and compiled from people from all across the country, which have been very.
Yep. Yeah. The whole series on sacraments, on the sacrament of the Eucharist, 40 essays gathered through Faith, Worship, and Ministry from laity, clergy, bishops, theologians, theological colleges all across Canada are there on Anglican.ca, and they're grouped in different kind of categories. You don't have to read all of them at the same time.
No, and I mean, the ones that I've read have been really insightful, and so I'd encourage people to take a look at it. Daniel writes, "It seems to me that it's time for a reboot." I know we've been saying that for 20 years plus, but we've actually have had a lot of things shut down at the moment. Is there a group of Anglicans exploring what the church might be like in 6 months or a year from now?
There isn't a group that I'm aware of that's doing that kind of nationally. I mean, because I think it is very contextual. It's going to have to depend, well, as we've seen already. I mean, you guys have been in an Atlantic bubble for quite a bit of this COVID time, whereas the rest of us have been up and down like yo-yos and all over the place. Now I realize that's broken apart now, and you're experiencing some of that. But I think the ending of COVID is going to be a bit like that. That there's going to be parts of the country that are able to move more quickly than others, and figuring out what this looks like. Yeah, reboot is probably a good word. I think we're going to need to pay attention, and we've always needed this, but we need to even more now, is to pay attention to having opportunity to talk about what this was like with people when we get back together. What did you learn, and what did you like, and what did you miss, and what do you wish you'd known? And to allow that to shape our formation in an ongoing way, and to reboot the fact that we've discovered that, yeah, the building isn't everything, but for some reason music is really important to us. So what does that say? What does that say about the human being, the human nature? There is a group of people working on discipleship models. I think, Shawn, you're a part of that group. So yeah, with Don Davis and others, who are looking at how do we disciple people in this time? And I think that group is going to have some interesting things to share as we go forward.
Yeah, and there's been a number of us, I mean, even informally, kind of within the ecclesiastical province, there have been a group of us that we joke because we all have a different title, but we're all essentially doing the same thing. But, and just kind of comparing notes and saying, okay, what's working for you guys? Or I saw you tried this. I've been hesitating about this. How did you do it? Or, because you're right. I think we've been long overdue for a reboot in how we do discipleship anyway. COVID has been kind of a catalyst to say, okay, how do we, as we talked earlier, people are in the comfort of their home. They don't have to come out kind of to a church, have that awkward, talk about Jesus, your faith. If they're not used to that, that's going to be awkward. Whereas I'm safe in my bubble, and if I get too uncomfortable, I can pretend I lost internet and just end the meeting, right?
And I think we need to connect people to what difference does faith make to ordinary life? What difference has faith made to being in COVID? Mm-hmm. I had one of those aha moments a few weeks ago when I was leading a retreat for clergy in BC, and I was framing what I was talking about by the changes that have been happening in the church. In my time in ministry, I was ordained in 1985. And I did this whole kind of overview in the first session. And at the end of the session, I said to the bishop by email, I said, let me know if there's any comments that would be helpful for me to hear. And she emailed back and she said, well, just one, and that's that the younger clergy don't remember the church you're describing. And I suddenly realized that there was a whole group of younger clergy whose entire ministry has been in the 21st century. And when I talk about the shift from a church where the pews were full and the Sunday schools were full of the 50s and 60s and to some degree the 70s, they weren't even born. And so I suddenly realized that I'm old. But I also realized that I need to remember that they came into ministry, were called by God into a church that looked very different, and they have a different formation and shaping around that, and that they actually have a lot to teach us and to tell us about that. And they're not expecting that kind of full pews, 400 kids in Sunday school model.
Yeah.
They're looking at something quite different. And I think those of us that grew up in that model and kind of think that was kind of normal, which it wasn't actually, it was an anomaly in and of itself, need to recall that the call to faith is about how faith touches your life on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that look like? And what are the questions you have, and how would you answer that as a Christian? Mm-hmm. Not because you've got a theological degree, but just because you're a Christian who's been baptized and prayed and read scripture. And I think we have to learn how to go back to much simpler forms of sharing faith.
Yeah, you're leading into Carol's question, and so I'll throw it out here. A couple of weeks ago, I was having a conversation with Mike Frost, who some people have heard and have known about, and he's written a number of great books. And we had him here in the diocese about a year and a half ago. One of the books he writes, he calls it's called "Keep Christianity Weird."
Yeah.
And basically he talks about the fact that as Christians, if we're living our discipled life, we're called to be living a life where people look and say, "What's up with you?" Like, in a good way. Far too often, I think I've been guilty of people looking at it and saying, "What's up with you?" in the not so good way. And so I think that's an opportunity for us as a church when we look at kind of that whole reboot thing of really taking our faith seriously, and not just, I'm here as part of the social thing, but one, my faith is important, but also I want to make a difference, and I want to live a life that is impacting my community and those around. Carol's asking, essentially, for you, what does it mean when you talk about discipling someone?
Well, two things. One is to be listening to the questions they're asking, not the questions I think they should ask,
right?
The questions they're asking about their own life, and it not necessarily framed in a religious way at all, but just the questions, and asking how can I share where God is in this moment, in this situation. A story I've told many, many times is when I was in my first parish, after church one Sunday, there was this man hanging around, and I said, can I help you? And he said, well, I have a question. I said, sure, let's sit down. And I've forgotten what the question was, but whatever it was one of those profound, something like, how do you explain suffering? One of those big questions. And I said, I don't know. But here's how I wrestle with that question. Here are the ways in which I think about that question. And he was in tears. And he said, to me, you're the first minister I've met who's been willing to say you don't know. And that's what he wanted to hear. He needed to hear that Christians don't have all the answers all neatly tied up in a bundle, that they wrestle with things as they go through life. And what he wanted was to have that conversation and that dialogue. And that man and his wife became good friends to this day. He's now almost 90. And we've had the most incredible theological arguments and discussions over the many years that I've known him. A man who had an incredible gift of evangelism with people. He would just talk about spiritual things with the guys when they were out hunting, men that would not have darkened the door of a church. And so I think it's about listening and being willing to share where you are with honesty, including the doubts, including the unknowns, but including what gives you hope and what gives you an ability to stay with faith. And it's not our job to make people Christian.
Right.
That's God's job through the Holy Spirit. But we better be sure we are doing our best to be honest, faithful reflections of Christ to them, and a faithful reflection of a human being struggling with what faith means.
Yeah, wow. And I love how you started that, Linda, is, that honesty of saying, I don't know. Yeah. I think, as you shared, that was probably the most profound part of that conversation of, your honesty and your vulnerability, and sharing that with them, where I think, certainly when I've had conversations with people, it's, oh, well, I need to have the right answer. Like, it ain't gonna happen.
I ran into that in one of the Alpha programs that I did when I was in a parish, and one of the lovely people in the parish who was a faithful parishioner for decades was a group leader, and I sat in on that group one night, and this person was Alpha is supposed to be a place where you can ask any question and be honest. And unfortunately, the group leader felt that they needed to direct the answer into the right answer.
Ouch.
And it was painful because I could see this person shutting down and just saying, okay, I'm out of here, and I think we need to invite people in and let them explore the faith in their own way and in their own time. And God will guide that conversation. And they are not on the same train that you were on in your faith. They're on a different train, and they will have different questions at different points. And just because you know that you've learned a certain thing about faith doesn't mean that they're ready to hear that yet. And I think the most important thing is honoring the integrity of loving your neighbor for who they are in that moment, not who you want them to be.
Right.
Just the way God loves you for who you are right in this moment, even though God knows that there's still work to do, unfinished work. And I think that's an exciting way to enter into conversation about faith.
Yeah. I just kind of before we wrap up, we did a study here in the diocese a few weeks back, looking at N.T. Wright's God in the Pandemic.
Yeah.
And there was one day I knew there was going to be a power outage because of construction. So we were in a good phase. So I went to the Starbucks across town and sat there and was just reading, kind of, because we were meeting that night. And so I was reading the chapter that we were going to be looking at. And someone kind of comes up to me and, sees the cover of the book and said, "Do you believe in that?" And I kind of looked at him and I said, "Which, God or the pandemic?" I said, because to be honest, I believe in both. And we got into a little bit of a conversation because he was clearly someone who had never been exposed to faith. Like, it was kind of this, I hear about it in movies or on TV, but it was not, and it was a really great conversation. But again, he had asked me a couple of times, like, why would a God allow this or make this happen? And I said, I said, I'm speaking for myself. I don't believe God made this happen. Why it's happening, I don't know, but I do believe God is suffering with me and with those around me. And it was a great conversation, but one of those, it, I was glad to have that courage to be able to just say, I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring.
And that's what faith is.
Yeah.
And we sometimes try to turn it into certainty instead of faith. Yeah.
Exactly. Linda, thank you so much for your time. I know, like many, you're jumping from Zoom to Zoom. And there's been a number of great resources and tips that have been shared in the chat, particularly around discipleship. Also, if you're on Facebook and looking to join the group, if you look on their discipleship resources, I think it is, it's on there. It's an open group. There's a number of gifted leaders that we have in the church that are contributing to part of that conversation. And so that's been really good and encouraging. As well, Judith extended the invite for people to join the Indigenous gospel-based discipleship, Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. Any final thoughts you have just before we close?
Thank you, Shawn. These kinds of opportunities that allow me and others to gather from across provinces without having to get on a plane or a train is really wonderful. And opportunities to wrestle with some of the questions that are facing us as a church and as individuals within the church about what will we do both during and beyond the pandemic. And the good news is that God is with us in it and through it. And the Anglican Church has gifts that will carry it if we will use our God-given creativity to take us forward.
Absolutely. Linda, before we close, I wonder if you would mind praying and offering a blessing for us.
Sure. Let us pray. God of infinite grace, you watch this broken and wounded planet and its peoples, and you entered into it in the person of Christ, and you continue to walk with us through your Holy Spirit to offer us hope through faith that this is your world, and in partnership with you, we can work for its healing and prepare it for that coming time when the fullness of the kingdom will be present. We ask you to be with each person who was here this night, filling them with peace, with a deep certainty of your faith, of your presence with them in faith, and in the joyful anticipation of celebrating Christmas, the coming of Christ in our midst, in person. Give us courage and strength for the long months of isolation and the continued lockdown and the restrictions. Give us a willingness to look for those who are in need and to lift up those needs and to meet them where we can. And give us that joy in our hearts that comes from knowing that whether we are in a church building, in our homes, in a car, or on the street, you are with us. Now grant us your blessing. Give us courage and faith to proclaim the good news of the joy we know in you wherever we may be. And may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be with you this night and remain with you always. Amen.
Amen. Thank you again, those of you who joined us for this conversation. Yes, it has been recorded. Some people have been asking. It will be posted sometime tomorrow morning on the Diocese of Fredericton website. and you can freely share that around if you want. Archbishop, thank you again so much for your time. It's been great to connect and chat with you, and hopefully we can do it again soon, and even more so, welcome you here into New Brunswick soon.
Yes, I'm afraid my travel schedule when this is over is going to... But I look forward to it very much. I really miss not being able to be with people in person, and look forward to those opportunities. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and blessings on you and your ministry. Good night, everyone.
Good night.